Chapter 4 Snorpig and the Herring, Part 1. Reindeer was a vessel of black oak with its planks overlapping one another, 60 paces from prow to the after cabin and 20 paces across the beam. Her dragon head was cased in thin gold, beaten into the chisel grooves of the wood. Garnets as big as a man's thumb joint were set in the mask for eyes, and the curling tongue was hammered out of red bronze. Bjorn badly wanted to go up to the prow platform and see the dragon head and touch it, but the watch-out man frowned at him and he shrank away. Once they had pulled offshore and Reindeer was riding the Iceland Sea like a nutshell, Starkad took the steerboard and drove the longship like a rider spurring a stallion. He had no eyes for Bjorn, but stared ahead. Giles Skallagrim only came down amidships, among the sea chests once a day. At other times he was shut in the after cabin with a man named Thorgort, trying to learn Latin. It was hard going, for the Jarl was getting over-aged for such things. Often the teacher, who wore wolfskin and iron byrnie or war shirt like the rest of the rovers, got angry with him and made him say words over and over again before he was satisfied. The Jarl was very slow at his Latin, although fast enough at spear play and sword work. Bjorn was glad he didn't have to learn Latin. It made no sense at all to him, as far as he could hear. There was only one man who would talk to Bjorn at first, a man out of Hedeby called Gork the Guardian. When Bjorn asked why a man should twist his brains at Latin, which was a right dog's tongue, Gork the Guardian said it was because the word of the White Christ was set down in Latin, or if that didn't suit you, it could be got at in Greek, but that was worse. It was like trying to read the thorns in a bush. This Gork the Guardian was a friendly enough man who had had a family of his own in his youth, but they had got lost in a fire when some Franks came up to bring Christ to the Danes by force. Before he joined the Viking community at Jomsburg, he had been a butcher. He told Bjorn that there wasn't so much difference, they both used axes. Some of the Joms Vikings got angry with Bjorn for running up and down reindeer, especially when they were playing chess and he accidentally knocked their boards sideways. They shouted at him and told him to jump into the sea and swim home to Iceland, where he belonged. But Gork took pity on him and let him help with one of the sheep that they had taken from the hill above the shore. Some of the joints Gork hung on hide thongs over the side, letting them trail in the water to keep cool and salted for when they were needed. Other pieces were put into buckets of seawater on deck. The meat the Vikings wanted to keep longest was buried in hot ash in the fire that Gork lit in a flat iron pan on the after platform. When this was baked, a dark brown, Gork lifted the deck planks near the mast stepping and put the meat down in the dark there, over the keel, among all the swords and spears. These weapons were thick with pig fat to keep them from rusting, so when mutton came up from under deck, it tasted more like pig meat than it should have done. But the men were so hungry before they reached Orkney that no one complained. One night as they lay under the tent on deck, with the pole star behind them, Gork told Bjorn that reindeer made a run up to Iceland almost every year just to see if there was anything worth taking. He said that most of the Northland was picked clean now, by one or another, and that if things didn't improve, the Joms Vikings would be running reindeer down the rivers to Miklagard next season, to see if the Greeks had anything they didn't want in their famous city where the emperor lived. Bjorn said, "If you come to Iceland every year, why have I not seen you before?" Gork the Guardian laughed and said, "Because when we come, all the folk go indoors till we have sailed away. Your folk must have kept you under the bed, or in a coffer chest. That's why you haven't seen us. Folk usually know when we are about. They light bonfires on the hills to tell one another to stay in. Oh yes, we know all about it, but we pay no heed. In fact, we often find our way by these bonfires at night. In the old days when Vikings were really fierce fellows, shipmen like us would go ashore and burn a whole town down for lighting those bonfires. But not today, now that we know about the White Christ. Now we do not even pick slaves up as often we used. We mainly take things like cups and swords and money chests." Bjorn said, "When you used to pick slaves up, did you ever take any from Thorstead, master?" Gork scratched his head and considered a while. Then he said, "Oh, aye. Only a year or two ago, in a fit of absent-mindedness, we picked up a woman who was down on the shore, gathering weed and driftwood for her fire. She was a pleasant woman, though she wept to leave her husband and her son, and kept us all awake." Bjorn said then, "I think that was my mother. Where did you take her, Gork?" Gork wrapped the blanket round him and said, "God knows, lad. It could have been Norway or Scotland or down to Mull. We called at all those places that year, along the route to the old Irish monks used to take. It was a bad year for trade. We got hardly enough to keep the bones from poking through our hides." Bjorn took the man's hand and said, "Try to remember, Gork. Where did you set this woman down?" But Gork could not remember. He began to get so cross then that Bjorn stopped asking and went to sleep, to dream of his mother, and then his father jumping over the cliff. One day, when he was feeling more lonely than ever because the men would not let him run up and down between the sea chests, and Gork had cut his finger chopping up a sheep and was lying down brooding, Bjorn went to Starcad at the steerboard and said, "Master, where are we bound for?" Starcad was like a hound smelling his direction. He took a long time to bring his eyes down to Bjorn. He said, "Unless we strike land soon, we are bound for the bottom, like 100 more that are on the high seas out of sight of land today. 2 of the planks on the larboard side need caulking with tar, and that we can't do until we get ashore. Haven't you heard the water bubbling below decks at night? We're sinking inch by inch, boy, so that's where we are bound for." He spoke so calmly that Bjorn thought he was joking. But 2 nights later, the water began to come up through the deck, and all the men got onto their sea chests to keep dry. Then Bjorn knew that Starcad had meant it.